Long before the age of the Buddha Gautama, before the rise and fall of kingdoms we know today, there existed an era so distant that it feels almost like another universe. According to the ancient Pali Chronicles, this was a time when the world was young in spirit, when human beings lived for 80,000 years, and when the natural environment glowed with a purity that today's world can hardly imagine. In that vast arc of cosmic history, the air was gentler, the minds of people were less corrupted by greed, and society, though simple, was woven together by harmony rather than conflict. It was during this age of calm and clarity that a being of extraordinary destiny was born, the one who would come to be known as Vipassī, the first fully awakened Buddha of the seven described in the Pali Canon. The world into which Vipassī was born reflects a cosmic rhythm. A Buddha arises only when conditions are ripe, when virtue is not yet completely lost but suffering is still present, enough to demand liberation. Even in a long-lived, peaceful age, the fundamental truths remained unchanged. Beings were still bound to the cycle of birth and death, still swept along from joy to sorrow, still unable to see the deeper laws that govern their existence. This paradox creates the perfect stage for a Buddha's appearance, a world calm enough to listen, yet trapped enough to need awakening. In the capital city of Bandamati, a royal child was born into the Katiya warrior noble class. His father, King Banduma, was a ruler of dignity and fairness, and his mother, Queen Bandamati, embodied the gentle nobility of the age. Legends say that the moment the child entered the world, an aura of radiance lit up the palace grounds, not a miracle in the magical sense, but a symbolic moment recognized by the wise men of the kingdom. The seers who gathered around the newborn prince proclaimed a prophecy that would shape the expectations of the entire realm. If he remained in the world as a householder, he would become a Kakavati, a universal monarch of unparalleled might and righteousness. But if he chose the spiritual path, renouncing royal life, he would without doubt become a fully enlightened Buddha, a world teacher whose wisdom would illuminate countless beings. His parents, overwhelmed with both pride and fear, hoped that he would choose the first path, the path of power, not renunciation. Yet even as a child, Vipassī displayed a calm sharpness that set him apart. His name itself, Vipassī, means the one who sees clearly, a title that would later become a profound symbol of his destiny. Though surrounded by beauty, gardens that stretched farther than the eye could see, and palaces that shifted with the seasons to ensure eternal comfort, the young prince carried within him a subtle, unspoken question. Why do beings who have everything still cling to something more? Why does a mind that can experience pleasure still turn restless? These seeds of contemplation would one day bloom into the immense realization under the Pali tree. The era of Vipassī Buddha was a golden age, but it was not free from the universal truths of change and impermanence. Even those who lived 80,000 years were not immortal. Even those who had perfect health would eventually see decline. The Chronicles emphasize this contrast to remind us that suffering is not created by material conditions alone. It arises from misunderstanding the nature of reality. Even in a world without famine, without war, without the chaos of modern society, the fire of ignorance still quietly burns. This is the world Vipassī observed as he grew, outwardly peaceful, inwardly incomplete. As the prince matured, signs of his unique spiritual sensitivity became clearer. He was not content with his royal duties, nor with the pleasure-filled entertainments his parents arranged to keep him grounded in worldly life. Instead, he watched people with a kind of serene curiosity, noticing how happiness arose and passed away, how people aged slowly but inevitably, how they clung to life with both hope and fear. It was this deep, intuitive contemplation that prepared him for the shocks that would come later, the encounters that would shatter the illusion of permanence and lead him toward renunciation. Thus, The world before Vipassī's enlightenment was a place of beauty wrapped around a core of unanswered questions. It was a time when humanity stood closer to the natural purity of the universe, yet still lacked the wisdom to escape the endless cycle of rebirth. In this atmosphere of serene ignorance, peaceful yet blind, the conditions matured perfectly for the birth of a Buddha. Vipassī was not just a prince destined for greatness. He was the embodiment of a cosmic necessity, a flame of awakening that the world had been waiting for across countless ages. And as the story moves forward, we watch how this serene but imperfect world gently pushes him toward the path that will reveal the deepest truths ever taught, truths that would one day form the foundation not only of his enlightenment, but of every Buddha who came after him. As Vipassī grew into adulthood, an adulthood that itself lasted thousands of years, the tension between the luxury offered to him and the wisdom stirring within him became impossible to ignore. Although his parents surrounded him with unimaginable comfort, offering him not just wealth, but the kind of pleasure and protection only a world age of harmony could provide, the prince's mind refused to settle. He lived within 3 palaces crafted to match the seasons so perfectly that even the slightest discomfort would never touch him. A palace of cool breezes for the heat of the warm months, one filled with fragrant blossoms for the rainy season, and a palace warmed with gentle fires for the colder days. Musicians, dancers, and attendants of refined virtue filled his days with entertainment. Every desire was anticipated before it even arose. Every wish was fulfilled before it was spoken. And yet the prince remained strangely unmoved. For though the world around him was beautiful, Vipassī carried a quiet sensitivity, a silent wondering that no pleasure could satisfy. He had the temperament of someone who sees the world not only for what it is, but for what it hides. He noticed the subtle weariness in the servants who try to hide their aging, saw the way seasons moved in cycles despite the comfort crafted to mask them, and felt the gentle but persistent pull of impermanence in every moment of joy. In a world where suffering was softened, it was still unmistakably present. And this awareness planted a restlessness within him, a yearning for something deeper than the hollow promise of endless luxury. The truth began to unravel before him on a day that would later be remembered in the ancient texts as a turning point not only in his life, but in the karmic history of humanity. Leaving the palace grounds for the first time in many years, Vipassī encountered a sight that shook him. An old man, frail and trembling, leaning on a staff. The attendants tried to explain it gently. "This is the nature of life, great prince, even for one who lives as long as 80,000 years. The youthful bloom inevitably fades. Strength withers." The prince absorbed their words like one who suddenly realizes he has been dreaming. The perfection of his world cracked, just slightly, but enough for the truth to seep in. Another day brought a second shock. He encountered a man racked with illness, unable to stand, consumed by pain that no palace treatment could erase. Vipassī saw not only the suffering, but the inevitability of it. If sickness could strike anyone, regardless of comfort, then no one was truly safe, not even a prince. The illusion of control began to unravel. Soon after, he witnessed a corpse carried by a silent procession, its lifeless body wrapped in simple cloth. Death, the attendants explained, comes for all beings. It is the final destination of every birth. For Vipassī, this was not merely a terrifying revelation, but a profoundly clarifying one. Even with an 80,000-year lifespan, life must end. Even in a peaceful world, decay is inevitable. Pleasure, longevity, beauty, everything he had been given was temporary. But it was the fourth sight that transformed his despair into resolve. A serene ascetic walking calmly along the road, his steps light, his mind untroubled. Vipassī saw in him something he had never found within palace walls, an inner peace untouched by the storms of existence. The attendants explained, "This, dear prince, is one who seeks the deathless." He has left behind the illusions of the world. For the first time, the prince felt a deep resonance, as if he had finally glimpsed the path he was meant to walk. These 4 encounters opened a vast inner landscape within him. He spent long nights pondering the nature of existence, questioning whether a life built on impermanence could ever offer true safety. Pleasure could distract, but it could not change the truth. Longevity could delay, but could not prevent suffering. His princely powers, his future kingdom, the boundless comfort of his surroundings, all of it seemed to dissolve the moment he realized their fragility. The more clearly he saw, the more unbearable the palatial life became. His parents sensed this shift, and out of fear that he would choose the path of renunciation, they increased the pleasures around him. But this only sharpened his clarity. The excess made the emptiness obvious. Finally, at the age of 8,000 years, still young by the standards of his era, but old in the maturity of understanding, Vipassī made the decision that would define his destiny. One quiet night, while the palace slept, he slipped away, leaving behind not just his royal inheritance, but the entire world of illusions that had attempted to shield him from reality. Unlike a dramatic escape filled with resistance or pain, his renunciation was serene, as if the world itself knew he was walking the path he had always been meant to follow. In that moment, the prince became a seeker of truth, stepping into a silence deeper than any luxury he had known. This was the beginning of a journey that would take him far beyond the boundaries of the kingdom, into forests untouched by human ambition, and ultimately to the foot of the Pali tree, where he would penetrate the deepest laws of existence. Vipassī's renunciation was not an act of escape from sorrow, but an embrace of clarity, a recognition that even in a world close to paradise, the cycle of birth and death cannot be escaped without awakening. His walk into the night marked the first great turning of the wheel, the quiet beginning of a path that every Buddha after him would walk again. After leaving the world of palaces behind, Vipassī wandered through vast forests and quiet plains, guided only by the hunger for truth that had awakened within him. He practiced disciplines of the mind that were known in that ancient era, methods passed down by sages who had glimpsed fragments of understanding, but never the whole. His meditation grew deeper than anything the world had seen for countless ages. Days flowed into years, years into centuries, yet the prince-turned-seeker remained unwavering. His body, shaped by a world of long lifespans, endured effortlessly, but it was his mind that transformed. Little by little, the veil that covers reality began to thin. And at last, when the conditions were perfectly aligned, Vipassī arrived at a quiet grove where a majestic Pali tree stood, its branches heavy with pale blossoms that opened gently to the night. This tree, known today for its delicate trumpet-shaped flowers, became the silent witness to the first full enlightenment of the 7 Buddhas. Unlike the Bodhi tree under which Gautama would later awaken, the Pali tree radiated a calm, fragrant presence that seemed to echo the purity of Vipassī's era. As evening descended, the forest grew still, as if every creature knew that something vast was about to unfold. Vipassī seated himself at the base of the tree, crossed his legs in the ancient posture of meditation, and allowed his breathing to settle into profound stillness. It is said that even the air ceased to stir. The world paused, balanced delicately between ignorance and awakening. As the first watch of the night deepened, Vipassī turned his mind inward with a clarity that had been ripening for lifetimes. His concentration sharpened into diamond-like precision, cutting through the layers of memory and identity. What he saw first was the vast expanse of his past lives, not in vague impressions, but in vivid detail. He recalled countless births and deaths, names, families, joys, and sorrows that stretched back further than the mind of any ordinary being could fathom. He saw himself as kings and hermits, rich men and poor men, gods and luminous worlds, and animals in humble forms. Life after life, countless cycles of becoming, driven by desire, fear, and ignorance. This knowledge did not terrify him. It clarified him. He saw that existence was not a single journey, but a wheel endlessly turning. In the second watch of the night, his vision expanded outward beyond himself. He perceived the lives of all beings, rising and falling according to the laws of their actions, karma unfolding with perfect precision. He saw how wholesome deeds led upward toward peace and insight, while unwholesome deeds dragged beings into sorrow and confusion. It was like watching a vast river of life, flowing in every direction, shaped by intention, pushed by craving, illuminated by the consequences of every thought and action. In that moment, the universe revealed itself not as chaos, but as a tapestry of interconnected causes and conditions. Each being, no matter how small, participated in this dance of becoming, bound by the same universal laws. Then came the final watch, the moment that would transform Vipassī from a seeker into a Buddha. His mind, now perfectly purified, turned toward the deepest structure of reality, the origins of suffering and the mechanism that holds the world together. What arose in him was the clear, direct understanding of dependent origination, the chain of 12 links that explains how existence arises and how it can cease. He saw with absolute clarity how ignorance leads to formations, how formations lead to consciousness, and how this process unfolds relentlessly until it culminates in birth, aging, and death. But he also saw the escape, the breaking of the chain by uprooting ignorance itself. When ignorance dissolves, the entire cycle collapses like a shadow, disappearing under sunlight. The ancient texts describe this moment with imagery that transcends ordinary language. They say that light spread across 10,000 worlds, not as a supernatural event, but as a way of expressing the vastness of the realization that dawned. It was the first true awakening in an age where the world had waited silently for a teacher of boundless compassion and perfect insight. Vipassī saw reality in its raw truth, unsentimental, unadorned, yet deeply liberating. He understood suffering and its end, its origin and its remedy. He realized the Four Noble Truths not as concepts, but as direct experience. And in that instant, the seeker vanished. The prince vanished. The renunciant vanished. What remained was the Sammasambuddha, the fully enlightened one, luminous and unshakable. When dawn approached, the paly blossoms fell softly around him, as if honoring the moment that would shape countless ages to come. The world had its first Buddha of this era, and the wheel of Dhamma had turned for the first time in unimaginable spans of cosmic time. Vipassī opened his eyes not to a new world, but to the true nature of the world that had always been there, impermanent, conditional, empty of self, yet profoundly workable for those who would walk the path he had just illuminated. His enlightenment was not a miracle. It was the natural flowering of perfect understanding. And beneath the paly tree, in the quiet glow of early morning, the universe felt lighter, as if relieved that one being had finally seen through its deepest secrets. After the night of awakening, when the silence of the forest seemed to vibrate with the depth of what had occurred, Vipassī sat beneath the paly tree in stillness. The universe around him had not changed, yet everything was different. For the first time in countless ages, a human mind had broken through ignorance completely. The weight of this realization was immense, but not heavy. It was a spacious, boundless clarity, a freedom that needed no celebration, no witness. Yet as the light of morning rose, Vipassī contemplated an ancient question that every Buddha faces. Should he teach? Should he attempt to share a truth so subtle, so profound, that even gods tremble before its depth? The path he had walked was not one of belief or ritual, but of direct insight into the machinery of existence. And he knew that most beings, swept along by craving and confusion, would find such insight nearly impossible to grasp. For a moment, he considered remaining in silence, not out of reluctance, but out of compassion, compassion for beings who might be overwhelmed by teachings that contradicted everything they believed. The Dhamma, he had realized, was deep, hard to see, going against the stream. How could the world understand that there was no eternal self, that pleasure was unreliable, that liberation lay not in grasping, but in letting go? Yet, as Vipassī reflected, a stirring presence approached him, not of earthly origin. The texts say that the Brahma realm itself trembled with anticipation. Radiant beings descended, bowing respectfully, imploring him, "O blessed one, let the Dhamma be declared. There are beings with little dust in their eyes who will understand." And with this request, Vipassī looked again into the world, saw its confusion, yes, but also its potential. He remembered the seekers of past lives, the ones who longed for truth, but had no teacher. The compassion within him rose like a tide. The wheel of the Dhamma would turn. Leaving the grove, Vipassī walked toward a region where two ascetics were living in search of truth, Khanda and Tissa. These two men had practiced diligently for years, searching for a path that could penetrate beyond the illusion of self. When they saw the serene figure approaching, radiant with the calm of awakening, they sensed immediately that they stood before a being of extraordinary wisdom. Vipassī spoke gently, not with authority, but with a clarity that needed no force. His voice carried the simplicity of deep truth. He explained that the path he had discovered was neither one of indulgence nor one of self-torture, but a middle way that avoided both extremes. He taught that all phenomena were impermanent, that suffering arose from craving, and that the sense of I was merely a construction held together by conditions. Khanda and Tissa listened with minds open and unguarded. The words were simple, but the meaning was vast. Vipassī did not preach, he pointed. He did not attempt to persuade. He led them gently inward. And as the understanding clicked into place, not intellectually, but experientially, their minds awakened. They saw what he had seen under the Pali tree. They realized the Four Noble Truths in their fullness. In that moment, they became the first disciples of the first Buddha of the age, the earliest arahants in the cosmic timeline of the Dhamma. A Sangha had been born, not through ritual, but through realization. From this small beginning, Vipassī began to travel across the lands, spreading teachings that were both ancient and eternally new. Wherever he walked, people felt a strange quietness around him, a stillness that made them pause and listen. His teachings did not rely on eloquence or elaborate metaphor. They were direct, truthful, luminous. He spoke of dependent origination, showing people that nothing arises independently, that all suffering begins with ignorance and ends with wisdom. He taught the cultivation of mindfulness not as a technique for stress relief, but as a gateway to seeing the nature of mind itself. Even those who did not fully understand felt the imprint of his presence, as if a door had been opened in the depths of their being. The Sangha that formed around him grew naturally, almost effortlessly. Those who heard him sensed that his words aligned perfectly with the nature of reality. There were no divisions, no spiritual pride, no quarrels, an echo of the purity of that ancient age. The harmony of his disciples became legendary, a model that later generations could only look back on with longing. It was said that during Vipassī's lifetime, the world seemed to breathe more gently, as if responding to the clarity spreading through it. His teachings, though spoken in words of that era, carried the same essence that every Buddha would later declare. He taught that liberation was not found in the heavens, not in rituals, not in clinging to ideas, but in seeing things as they truly are. His Dhamma was a mirror, one that reflected the truth without distortion. And wherever he went, that mirror awakened. Those who were ready, those with just enough dust in their eyes, to receive the first glimpse of freedom, By the time Vipassī completed the first cycle of teaching, the world had changed. A movement had begun, not political, not cultural, but spiritual in the truest sense. With each disciple who awakened, the darkness of ignorance thinned just a little. The wheel of the Dhamma, once set in motion, would continue turning long after the Pali blossoms had fallen from the tree of his enlightenment. And in this turning, the world encountered for the first time the path that would echo across countless ages, reappearing again through the Buddhas who followed in his footsteps. Long after Vipassī Buddha's parinibbana, long after his golden age faded into the silence of forgotten eons, the legacy of his teaching continued to ripple through the cosmos like an endless wave of truth. For a Buddha does not leave behind monuments of stone or temples of gold. He leaves behind a way of seeing, a vision of reality that remains timeless even as worlds rise and collapse. The sermons he delivered under the Patali trees, the thousands of arahants he guided, and the vast community of disciples who carried his words across the lands all became part of an unbroken spiritual lineage that would later inspire the Buddhas who followed, including the Buddha Gautama of our present age. Vipassī's Dhamma was said to be vast, clear, and profoundly transformative, embodying the same Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path, yet expressed in the majestic style of an era where lifespans were immense and human clarity was greater. His teachings emphasized the direct vision of reality, urging beings to see the conditional nature of existence without deception or distortion. Even in a world of extraordinary prosperity and beauty, he reminded his disciples that all compounded things are bound to dissolve, and only wisdom can liberate the mind from the endless turning of rebirth. Though countless eons separated Vipassī's dispensation from the present, fragments of his legacy remain preserved in the Pali Canon, allowing us to glimpse the magnitude of his awakening. The stories of his life became a source of inspiration for later generations, illustrating that enlightenment is not limited to a particular time, culture, or world age. It is a universal possibility whenever wisdom arises. His majestic presence, towering height, and radiance were symbolic reflections of the luminous purity of his mind, untouched by greed, hatred, or delusion. The many thousands of arahants he trained demonstrated the power of unwavering truth, revealing that liberation is attainable not only by rare individuals, but by anyone willing to see reality as it truly is. The rise of his vast saga established a model that future Buddhas would follow, showing how compassion naturally expresses itself through teaching and guiding others on the path to freedom. In this way, Vipassī's legacy transcends the boundaries of myth and history. It is not merely the story of a distant Buddha from an unimaginable past. It is a reminder that the potential for awakening exists in every era, in every mind. His message echoes through time, that suffering has a cause, that the world is governed by conditionality, and that freedom arises when one sees deeply and directly, without clinging or confusion. Even now, when we hear the name Vipassī, we are not simply remembering an ancient being. We are touching the same wisdom that illuminated his mind, the same insight into impermanence, suffering, and non-self that continues to guide seekers across generations. His life is an invitation to cultivate discernment, to refine one's understanding, and to walk the path of awakening with courage and clarity. As the video closes, the figure of Vipassī Buddha stands not as a distant legend lost in cosmic time, but as a living symbol of humanity's highest potential. His legacy endures wherever mindfulness is practiced, wherever compassion is cultivated, and wherever wisdom is sought with sincerity. In the vast unfolding of the universe, Buddhas come and go, yet the truth they reveal remains eternally accessible. Vipassī's vision, his seeing clearly, continues to inspire those who wish to understand the nature of existence. In this way, he is not only a Buddha of the ancient past, but a beacon whose light still reaches us, guiding all who long for liberation toward the timeless freedom of Nibbana.